Good morning, everybody. Joshua Laycock here once again. Day 60-something, which is pretty crazy. I'd like to speak with you a little bit about, courage in a different way. So yesterday, I was having a chat with a bunch of men in the men's group that I'm a part of. And every now and then we do these things called hot seats, where we, at their choice, someone says, okay, I've got some stuff I'm working through. I'd like to sit down and I'd like to have a conversation with you guys and get your take on it and get your advice and maybe have a conversation about some tough stuff that they're dealing with. And we had two men that stepped up and we had two very, very powerful conversations that I hope both guys took something important away from that conversation. And I was really proud of those guys for opening up and being honest about the stuff that they're working through, and for having the courage to tell us about the things that, I think a lot of men are conditioned to not talk about. I think there's probably a lot of women that are conditioned that way as well, but, I don't know. I'm speaking from my own perspective. And the word that I don't want to use is I don't want to use the word vulnerable. And look, I understand, I think, what people mean when they say you should be vulnerable. Vulnerable is a strength. And I agree with the sentiment, but I think the words are wrong and I think the words are dangerous. Vulnerable means open to attack, open to injury, open to hurt, right? Fortifications which are vulnerable are not fortifications. In life, there are times that you do need to, I think, steel yourself from outside forces. I mean, it's just true. There are, however, circumstances where you should be able to surround yourself with the kind of people who allow you to be open and honest with what you're working through, and who can help you with good intentions and with love and with empathy to discuss the challenges that you're facing. To me, that isn't vulnerability. It's courage, and it's kind of in line with what I spoke about yesterday, which is not always following the trends, not always doing what you're supposed to do, not always sticking in line, not always being ordinary. In this world, taking control of your personal development is extraordinary. Thankfully, it's a little less extraordinary than it used to be. People are doing it a little bit more regularly. But I worry that the word vulnerable, one, I think it's giving a bit of a false impression, and I know a few people have spoken about this lately, is that, don't make yourself vulnerable such that as you don't want to leave yourself open to attack. You don't want to leave yourself open to injury, right? I mean, part of personal development and part of being better and stronger is actually making yourself a little less vulnerable to injury, to attack, to insult. You might put yourself out there, but I don't ever make myself vulnerable, because I do think that vulnerability is, by its very definition, a weakness. So this whole vulnerability is a strength, I think, is a dangerous play on words, because while some may get it, many, I think, don't. And they will be vulnerable, and they will be attacked, and they will be harmed, and there is no strength in allowing that to happen. There is no strength in allowing yourself to be harmed, to allowing yourself to be destroyed. But when you surround yourself with the right people, there is tremendous strength, or the potential for strength, in courage. So these men who talked to us yesterday about challenging things that they're working through, they weren't vulnerable because there was no risk of attack. There was no risk of being harmed. They displayed extraordinary courage in addressing some of the things that were challenging them and some of the things that were making them feel uncomfortable, that were holding them back from evolving and from moving to the next level. And we should absolutely celebrate courage, because courageous acts, when done properly, will lead to strength and will lead to power and will lead to increased integrity. But vulnerability in its purest sense doesn't lead you there. And I understand the concept. You may have a spouse who has very traditional views. And yeah, I guess in some ways there is the potential risk, I guess, of being harmed or being ridiculed or mocked by being honest and courageous about the things that you want to say and the things that you want to address. But that is a risk. That is a calculated risk that I still believe is founded in courage, meant to strengthen. Embracing the concept of vulnerability means that you are embracing a weakness, that you are embracing the thought or the threat of harm and destruction. And I don't think that that's worth it, because if there is the real threat of harm or destruction, and we're talking about feelings or emotions or those types of things that we're talking about, then I think it may not be worth it, or you may not be in the right company. And that's a tough thing to think about. But if you are in that situation where you're like, boy, I would like to tell so-and-so how I feel, but I don't know how they'll react, think of it as a courageous act, not as submitting to vulnerability. And if you see that person attacking, if you see that person trying to exploit some form of vulnerability, then I do think that you have an opportunity or an obligation to protect yourself, but then continue the discussion. Don't shut off, right? But if you see someone who sees a gap in your armor and they attack it, well, then I think that you have to close the gap, and then you have to have a different conversation. Don't lay yourself bare. I don't think. Unless it's a Hail Mary pass, right? Unless it is the potential end of a relationship or something very catastrophic, I don't see the value in being vulnerable. I do, however, see tremendous value in being courageous. And maybe it's semantics, but I think that those semantics are probably what's holding a lot of people back, especially a lot of men, in being open and honest, like the guys that I talked to yesterday. It's probably what holds a lot of people back. If you encourage a man to be courageous with his emotions, with his feelings, and to open up to other men who are there, whose mission is to make them also better, the brother's keeper, you're more likely to get some traction. If you've got a husband who won't open up, don't tell him to be vulnerable. Ask him to be courageous. Show him that it's not a vulnerability. Show him that there is upside. Vulnerabilities expose the downside. Those nuances matter. And if we're going to evolve, and if we're going to use evolved terminology, and if we're going to invent new terminology like things like vulnerability is strength, I think we have an obligation to get it right and to be intentional about our words and to understand the impact of those words. I don't think that vulnerability is celebrated. I think that courage is celebrated. So go and be courageous. Don't be vulnerable. Be strong. Don't be weak. Be powerful. Don't be meek. Be assertive. They're important differences. They're different sides of the same coin, but they matter. Be courageous. Have a fantastic day. I'm going to go get some coffee and start mine. I'll talk to you soon. Probably tomorrow.